Well, good morning to everyone on this wonderful sunny morning. Welcome to Brook Street Unitarian and Free Christian Chapel at Knutsford. And today is a special day for us because we're going to be celebrating one of the town's most famous daughters, Elizabeth Gaskell. As a Unitarian, she used her gift of writing with that ethos of the Unitarian belief in valuing all people. She used that gift for the betterment of those around her. She saw in her own time the dreadful working and living conditions of many, many people in Manchester. And she wrote talking about those conditions. She also mentioned the plight of many women in society at her time. And those words from her novels were read by people who had power and who had the ability to make things change for the better. And that is a wonderful thing, to think that one person could make such changes. But it inspires us too to think in our own way we can make changes for the better. And so I'd like to light our chalice candle thinking of Elizabeth Gaskell, thinking of the changes that we've had benefit from, and also perhaps we can think of the changes that we may be able to make in our lives, in our community. My opening words today are actually taken from one of her books, the novel Ruth. The chapel stood on the outskirts of town, almost in fields. It was built about the time of Matthew and Philip Henry, when the dissenters were afraid of attracting attention or observation, and hid their places of worship in obscure and out-of-the-way parts of the town in which they were built. The chapel had a picturesque and old-world look, for luckily the congregation had been too poor to rebuild or new face it in George III's time. The staircases which led to the galleries were outside at the end of the building, and the irregular roof and worn stone steps looked grey and stained by time and weather. The grassy hillocks, each with little upright headstones, were shaded by a grand old wych elm, a lilac bush or two, a white rose tree, and a few laburnums. And the casement windows of the chapel were made of heavy leaded diamond-shaped panes. I'm so pleased that our past hadn't got the cash to make this a modern place. I am so pleased, and I know most of the time we're not pleased when people are short of money, but this beautiful chapel remains as it was in her time so that we can enjoy the history and the simple beauty of it. Let us now celebrate in song, if we can, by singing hymn number 423, O God, the darkness roll away, which clouds the human soul. And I think we're going to hear the tune first before we stand and sing. Thank you. Be seated. I don't know if any of us have actually gone to a place, might be an ancient building, might be a new house, and felt something almost in the brickwork, felt a sense of loving, or sometimes not, felt maybe that they've not enjoyed the atmosphere. Do any of us know that feeling where we feel immediately comfortable or sometimes not so welcome? And we can't really describe it, but there is just something in the building. And I think about this chapel, this wonderful ancient building, and I think if only the walls could speak, if only they could tell us about those brave dissenters who founded this chapel. If only we could get that sense of those people from the hundreds of years, 300 years and more, that this building has shared many people, different people, with the commonality of that freedom of worship that we Unitarians celebrate. And I think if we could use our imagination, we could imagine people sitting alongside of us in the pews over all those centuries, being with each other as if time didn't matter, being with each other with that same commonality of wanting to simply do good in the world, holding our faith dear, and having the freedom to experience that without the oppression of any dictates. And so today, I think maybe we should try and consider Elizabeth Gaskell in her own time. If we can think that she would be sitting in one of these pews, as would her family have been. Let's imagine ourselves with people in that Victorian era and wonder what they would have known of Elizabeth's life. I do know that she was brought up in this town of Knutsford, so perhaps we can think of Hannah Lum being amongst us and listen to her story.
My name is Hannah Lum. I live nearby at the side of the heath. Some years ago I had some dreadful news. My sister Elizabeth, who lived in London, had died, leaving 2 children, John, who was 12, and baby Elizabeth, who was just 1 year old. My sister's husband, William Stevenson, felt that he could work and look after John as he was almost independent, but he couldn't cope with the baby. So he asked me if I would bring her up. I wanted to, of course, but I was a bit worried about how I would manage, for I live with my invalid daughter, Marianne, as my husband has mental health problems and now lives in an asylum. But when I thought about it, I knew that I had a large, caring family who would all help with the baby if I needed support, for I was the youngest of 9 children. My parents, Samuel and Anne Holland, live a couple of miles away from here, and my elder brother Peter is a doctor and lives in Knutsford. All my family attend this chapel, and so I knew that this was another area of support. I agreed to be a mother to baby Elizabeth. The journey from London by stagecoach was quite difficult, but once she was here, we settled into a good life. I didn't have much money, so I did all my own housework, but I still had time to care for Elizabeth, who was a delightful child and brought a lot of happiness to Marianne and myself.
What an incredible task Hannah Lum took on. She had no husband with her at home, an invalid daughter, and yet she knew that she had to do the right thing. What a wonderful example to us all. And what a wonderful example it would have been to Elizabeth Gaskell as she grew up. And what of Hannah Lum's brother, Dr. Peter Holland? Let us learn now a little of his work.
I am Dr. Peter Holland. I live in Knutsford with my family. I have a very large practice as I am the family doctor to all the Knutsford people. I treat the very poor and the very rich. I reach my patients by dog cart. Sometimes I travel miles when I have to treat the lords and ladies whose great mansions are set in wonderful parkland. My niece Elizabeth loves to come with me in the dog cart when I go on my rounds. I also look after the apprentices at Greg's Quarrybank Mill, so you can tell that I'm a very busy man, but I always find time to attend this chapel as the services refresh me.
Surely Elizabeth would have learnt so much from her uncle, because she'd go with him sometimes and see the different patients. She would have known the very rich and the very poor. And I think that made a big impression on her again. I think that she wouldn't have thought so much about the differences in wealth, but she would have focused more on the differences in health and caring and responsibilities. And that is another lesson for us all, not to be blinkered by wealth and ownership, but to see the true personalities and the characters of those that we meet. And so I feel it would be so wonderful now to listen to something of the younger Elizabeth.
I had a very happy childhood with Aunt Lum. She was more than a mother to me. She taught me reading and writing, and also sewing and household management. Sometimes Aunt Lum would take me to visit her women friends in Knutsford. She listened to all the chit-chat, stories and gossip. I still laugh when I remember how Mrs. Harker told us that she had dressed her cow in a grey flannel shirt and bloomers after the poor animal had fallen into a lime pit on Knutsford Heath and lost its fur. Sometimes I would join my cousins and friends at picnics and garden parties in the grounds of country houses around Knutsford. I attended this chapel every Sunday with my darling Aunt Lum and other members of my family, and later became a Sunday school teacher. There were sad times for me, for my elder brother John sailed to India as a young man and was never heard from again. Everyone presumed he was lost at sea. When I was 12, I was sent to school at Stratford, which I enjoyed very much, and as time went by, I would often visit family members in Edinburgh, North Wales, Worcestershire, Newcastle, and the Lake District. I took great pleasure in travelling, but Knutsford was always the place closest to my heart. One evening, I was invited to the home of the senior minister of Cross Street Chapel, Manchester, and met his junior minister, the Reverend William Gaskell. We got on exceedingly well. A short time later, William proposed marriage, and after meeting him at our home in Knutsford, Aunt Lum teased me by saying, "Why, Elizabeth, how could this man ever take a fancy to such a giddy, thoughtless thing as you?"
Let's now sing our second hymn, number 469, Not on This Day, O God Alone.
On this day, O God alone, would we
be seated. And now let us hear from Eliza, Elizabeth Gaskell's friend and sister-in-law.
Elizabeth became a good friend of mine when she and William, my dear brother, decided to marry. And what a wonderful day that was, only marred by the fact that the law would not permit the couple to marry in this chapel. They had to attend St. John's, the parish church, to meet the legal requirements. Susan and Catherine, Elizabeth's cousins, were bridesmaids. Sadly, her papa had died 3 years before, so her uncle, Dr. Peter Holland, walked her proudly down the aisle. We have continued to have a really wonderful friendship over the years.
We can tell already that they have been many important factors in Elizabeth's life that undoubtedly have created the character and the philosophy that she had. She lost her mother as a baby. Her father was not able to care for her and work, and so it was her aunt that brought her up. And so she learnt that other people can be mothers too. She saw differing aspects of society with her uncle, and of course she was a member of this chapel, and she would have been influenced by the teachings of Jesus, and her faith was so paramount to her that she would use those teachings to help her in what was to become her work as a minister's wife, as well as a caring human being and author. Let us now hear from her husband, William Gaskell.
Ours was an ideal partnership. Our first home was in Dover Street, Manchester. But sadness came to us when our first child was still born. The following year, our darling daughter Marianne was born, and then Margaret and Florence followed at intervals of 4 years. Elizabeth was a great support in my work as minister of Cross Street Chapel. I took her with me to visit most of the families under my care. This later inspired her to write about the hardships that they had had to endure. We moved to a larger house. Then, to our joy, our little son Willie was born. Yet 10 months later, he died of scarlet fever when we were on holiday in North Wales. We were heartbroken. Elizabeth thought she would never feel happy again, but I comforted her and suggested that she should attempt to write a novel to distract her from her grief. Shortly afterwards, our fourth little daughter, Julia, was born, quickly followed by the publication of her first novel, Mary Barton, A Tale of Manchester Life. Elizabeth realised that the book would be controversial, so she insisted on having the book published under the name Cotton Mather Mills, Esquire, to protect me from any adverse publicity. Our growing family needed a larger house, which we found in Plymouth Grove, a pleasant house which was just out of the city, surrounded by green fields. Elizabeth was a woman of great energy. She was a loving mother, an excellent minister's wife, and a prolific writer. I supported her in all her writings, although there were many challenging times where even members of my own congregation were scandalized by the content of her novels.
All of the hymns chosen this morning were written by William Gaskell. So let us sing now our third hymn, 188. Forth went the heralds of the cross, no dangers made them pause. 188. Please be seated. And now let us hear from the older Elizabeth Gaskell.
As a result of Mary Barton, and by now my identity had been discovered, I was asked by Mr. Charles Dickens to contribute to his weekly magazine, Household Words. I wrote several instalments which were so well received that I later combined them into the novel Cranford, which was a gentle story about this country town. I then felt moved to write about the plight of fallen women. This book was called Ruth. The idea of an impure heroine was so shocking to the general public that fathers burnt the book lest it should fall into the hands of their innocent daughters. I was even shunned by some of my own friends and acquaintances. But I believed that I had spoken out my mind as best I could, and I had no doubt that what was meant so earnestly must do some good. My next novel was North and South, which highlighted the plight of the mill workers. Following the death of my dear friend Charlotte Bronte, I was approached by her father, the Reverend Patrick Bronte, to write her biography. It was published in 1857. Again, I had to deal with the controversy surrounding this book, as I was strongly criticised for being too frank about certain aspects of Charlotte's life. Tired of being a controversial writer, my next three novels, Sylvia's Lovers, Cousin Phyllis, and Wives and Daughters, were written in a more gentle and tranquil vein. I believed that Wives and Daughters, my final novel, was possibly my best work. But one thing is clear: women must give up living an artist's life if home duties are to be paramount. It is different with men. However, I am talking of women. I do believe we all have some appointed work to do, which no one else can do so well, which is our work. But first, we must find what we are sent into the world to do and define it and to make it clear to ourselves. That's the hard part.
In Elizabeth's time, the minister of this chapel was the Reverend Green. He was the minister here for an unbelievable 45 years. He was a very intelligent man and believed so much in education for all. And he worked very hard to ensure that he could educate both children and adults as well as his ministry. He also wrote a book, Knutsford, Its Traditions and History. Let him now tell the closing chapter of Elizabeth's life.
This is my 39th year as minister in this chapel. When I first came here, Elizabeth was just 17, and I noticed what a bright young woman she was. I was delighted when I heard that she was to marry William Gaskell, my great friend and fellow student at Glasgow University. Our two families met frequently, enjoying our common interests, particularly education. It was, however, a dreadful shock some years later to learn of her sudden death at the home in Hampshire that she was secretly buying for William's retirement. She was brought back to Knutsford, her Cranford, and I had the sad duty to conduct the funeral here, burying her alongside the graves of her family.
Let us now prepare for prayer. Let us bow our heads for prayer. God of us all, we know that there have been many changes through the years. And we are now so fortunate to have healthcare, education, good working conditions, and laws that protect us. Help us to remember those from the past who gave so much that we can live in comfort and safety today. And today we have thought about people like Aunt Lum, who cared for vulnerable children, like Uncle Peter Holland, who cared for the sick regardless of their station and finances. Thinking of the long-term and genuine friendships such as Eliza, and the supportive people like Reverend Green, who encouraged education for all, and William Gaskell, who encouraged his wife in a time when women were not encouraged to be themselves as individuals. He encouraged her to use her creative talents for the benefit of others. And today, as we have focused on Elizabeth Gaskell's life, help us to truly appreciate her gifts and also for her ability to make changes in society for the better. May knowing of her life encourage us to stretch ourselves into being more positive in our actions for justice and peace. And we ask that we can feel hopeful for tomorrow and feel blessed for our lives today. And as we think of our own personal lives, let our prayers go out to those that we know that are suffering through ill health, both physically and mentally. And we think particularly of Denise, a member of this congregation, who is undergoing very unpleasant treatment at this moment. We offer a prayer for peace for all, peace within families, peace within friendships, peace in the workplace, peace with nations, and peace in the world. Hear our prayer, God of love. Hear our prayers. And let us now have a few moments of silence where we think of all those people that have been examples to us, all those people that have perhaps given of their time, given of actual gifts, given of their love, so that we have been able to benefit. Just think of those people that have been good examples for the way that we now live our lives. Let us have a few moments of silence, contemplating and offering thanks before we say our final prayer. And now I ask that we all say the prayer that Elizabeth and her family would have said all through their lives, the prayer of Jesus. Let us say together the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Thank you. And now our final hymn, number 191. Though lowly here, our lot may be high work we have to do. And I think that's very appropriate, thinking of someone like Elizabeth Gaskell, who believed that she had a high work and that we all have a high work that we have to do if we only listen to our hearts and hold our faith dear, we all can do something to make life better for us all. The last verse of this hymn that William wrote, "Thus may we make the lowliest lot with rays of glory bright. Thus may we turn a crown of thorns into a crown of light." I can't imagine how dreadful it must have been for Elizabeth to have had her books burnt. I can't imagine how it must have been for her to know that people in her husband's own congregation would destroy the books rather than let their daughters see them. I can't imagine in the day we are in this country that we couldn't be able to say what we think. It's for people like Elizabeth that were brave enough to actually start that change. People that were able to say, I think this is wrong, in whatever way it's couched. In Elizabeth's case, it was within her novels. As far as our Unitarian past goes, the dissenters, those people that broke away from the authorized church and said, it's too political, it's not about faith anymore, we've got to go back to something of worth. All those people in our past have helped us to have the freedom today, helped me to be able to have what is called the freedom of the pulpit. All Unitarian ministers have that. They're able to say exactly what their heart tells them, what their faith tells them, what their conscience says. I admire people like Elizabeth Gaskell. I admire those people who can help us move forward to make this a fairer world for everyone. And I also honor all the people in her life who helped her to become who she was. All the care that she was given, all the support that she was given, because she would have had a difficult time in some parts of her life. But she carried on with courage because her faith told her to do so. And we must celebrate that. And we must try to use that as an example for ourselves. And then my closing words are from the novel Cranford, the book which talks about Knutsford, and particularly the ladies of Knutsford. Quite a humorous book, thinking about the lady who covered her cow in flannel bloomers because it got hurt. But she says in the novel, "It seemed to me that where others had prayed before to their God in their joy or in their agony was of itself a sacred place." We are gathered in that same sacred place today, where people before us have gathered before God. Let us really appreciate that. All those people before us gathered in this sacred place. So may we think and take away with us all the examples that we're aware of, and even those that we may imagine. Take away those examples of courage and kindness and human and humble intellect as an illustration that we all can follow. And I say to you all, may God be with you on this day and evermore. Amen.